things are getting very surreal. And dreams are, and life are starting to merge in ways that they've never done before. And all kinds of things are coming up and coming down and in every direction. And I wondered, it occurred to me, and I wanted to ask if there's a relationship, does the surreal relate to the real, in the sense of, is there a surreal 1, a surreal 2, and a surreal 3?
Well, let's see. That's a good question, actually. One that I've never thought about before, so I'll have to wing it. But I would say the surreal that you're primarily talking about is the fact that the conscious mind, which usually has a boundary, a frame between it and the subconscious and the sensor, with all of the shadow figures and drives, etc. It's usually unaware of those. And it's almost always unaware of the superconscious understanding of all that. Well, right now, the sub and superconscious are bleeding into your conscious mind. And that's what's creating that surreal effect. And because the buddhi has not yet entirely opened, it can't parse out what's what, right? But everything is symbolic, right? So you're being presented with a hyper overload of information about the unfolding shifts within the dream field that indeed are surreal and going to be more surreal on the macrocosmic level. And you know, I've been talking about some of that surreality for a long time, so I won't go into how many of those kinds of signs and wonders and awesome events, because it's all to create awe, that's it. But I suppose you could say that at Real 2 there is a surreal also, because the archetypes are also in superposition with the manifest character. And in a way, the character is beginning to decompose back into its original archetype, right? Decompose in a good way, like the caterpillar to the butterfly, to a higher level of coherence, without it processing anything, though, it's just happening. So in terms of Real 3, I just think that it's even too awesome to call it surreal or unreal or anything, because it's beyond words. But definitely it brings one into a state of speechlessness, and in that state, even more information will come. So, once your consciousness has attuned to the intelligence that's sending the information, it will immediately decode it, and it will explain things happening in the different levels of the dream field. Okay, so it's all. It will become useful at the moment when you need to read what that's about. And so until then, I wouldn't worry about it. Okay, but enjoy it, right? Because it's an incredible script. And, you know, Shakespeare could not have come up with something this incredible. And how it's going to unfold now is in a very accelerated way. That's going to shock a lot of people who thought, oh, no, it's going to take a lot longer. And certain things that couldn't possibly happen, they will see happen. Okay.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for this constant stream of wisdom that you share with us. Oh, I'm supposed to speak into here. I was having a conversation today just about all of the suffering occurring in the world at this point in time, and it brought up a recollection of a teaching I'd heard from Krishnamurti, the other Murti, a few years ago, where someone asked him, what can we do to help the suffering of others on the planet? And his response was, who are we to take away another's suffering? And I just wondered what your thoughts on that would be.
Well, you can only take away someone's suffering if you really understand it. Because no one can heal another person. And so the only way you can have a true healing effect is to realize your non-duality with the one suffering. And once you know that the one suffering is yourself, and you can endure it, and you know that it actually isn't really suffering, because you know it's not your suffering, even though it is, right? Because it's the suffering of a construct. It's the suffering of an identification of consciousness with a form. But your consciousness, if you are free of that construct, you will have the intelligence of understanding why that particular form had to have that particular symptom that somatized a kind of mental and spiritual suffering, and that had to be enacted because of the unwillingness to face it at that level. And so the karma had to come back, because no one can run away from these things. They have to be purified one way or another. And most people choose to purify their hearts through physical suffering rather than spiritual. Others choose mental suffering, mental disorders that will create problems for others as well, and so they end up increasing the karma. And physical symptoms can do that also, depending on the nature of the relational systems one is in. But once you understand that there is only one intelligence that is actually serving as the self of every being, then the only one really experiencing it is God. That's who you are, that's who everyone is. And it's often the rite of passage through suffering, intense suffering, that opens one to fully surrender to God. Mm-hmm. And then one is saved, and it was because of that suffering. Ask anyone who's gone through a near-death experience as a result of some horrible accident or sickness, right? And they're so happy that they got that freedom to see God, to understand the angelic realm, etc. That
I did.
Yes, so they don't even want to go back, right? But it was worth it, and none of them complain about their karma once they understand. Yeah. So everything that unfolds is perfect. But until you have realized that, you're going to want to interfere. But it's God's will that has to unfold, not anyone else's. Mm-hmm. And when you are clear about whether you are acting as an instrument of the will of God, not of an ego, then whatever you do will have accuracy and potency and achieve the effect. But only because the cause and the effect were in a non-dual relationship. Okay?
That reframes it perfectly.
Thank you. I'm glad I could help. Well, if there are no questions, let's meditate again. Not that we ever should stop meditating, but bringing our attention once more to the inmost self, the self that you were before you were born in this body, before you were brought into this world at all, in your original true essence. That eternal consciousness is who you are at this very moment. be absorbed in the absolute presence that is beyond words, beyond thought. And let your attention be completely absorbed into the energy, into the light, into the love, the ecstatic joy, the vastness, the brightness, the brilliance, the beauty, the purity, the goodness, the sweetness of the nectar of immortality. And feel your soul opening, your heart opening to the infinite self. And being completely drawn into that field of love. Beyond life and death. And be aware of your formless nature, your unmanifest essence. That has no perceivable qualities, that can never be objectified, that can never be known as an other, but is always yourself. And realize that there is no difference between you meditating or you not meditating. You awake, you asleep. You within a body and you bodiless. No difference. Nothing ever changes in the eternal light. And yet there are dreams. And the dreamer is always beyond. Thou art that. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Thank you, Shunya. I want to try to use words. I feel my throat being very constricted, and so I feel like it's a sign to try to speak what's going on in there. I feel like I'm struggling a lot, and have been, and I've probably said this 100 times to you, but there's this feeling of like there's still desire to act in the world, to do things that I feel like I'm not able to do. And I know that there's a way that I'm making it into something outside of myself, when really what needs to happen is something that's going on internally. And when you were speaking in the last satsang about the ashram as the cremation ground for the ego, there is a sense of like, there's a part of me that has put me here to do that, and that there's this kind of rite of passage that I know needs to happen, and I'm trying to understand it internally in the sense of like, I see that my psychology is stuck in ways that are still like a boy, and wanting to grow into the psychology of a man, to be able to make decisions and to be able to be decisive and to take responsibility for things in life. And so I feel like the part of me that is trying to understand it at that level isn't able to understand the subtlety of the things that you're actually speaking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels like it's not that that's not needing to happen, that transition, the boy to the man, that rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
But there's, I guess I feel like I'm coming up against the limitations of that way of thinking about it and trying to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like all I can do is say I need help.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be able to perceive the subtlety with what you're speaking about in these kinds of guided meditations. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a yearning for it. There's an understanding that there's
Yes.
an incapacity to perceive it, like you were speaking about
Well,
at
that's
the
your
beginning.
narrative, that there's an incapacity. See, you have two problems. One is you believe your narrative when it's not telling you the truth. It is fiction. Your character is fiction. You're complaining about a fictional character, but the complaint is part of the fiction, right? It's written into the script. It's not like the director is deciding to change the character, right, or how it proceeds, or the playwright. It's the character itself. So you can't alter that script. And that character will not shift from its puer structure, because that's the normal structure. You didn't get any other options. No other apps were put into your ego to be able to make such a shift, because there was nobody in your world and your family system back then who was an adult in the true sense that you're wanting to be now. And so there was never a mimetic emulation of someone like that. And now it has, since adulthood, it's been closed within that shell and can't learn anything new. It's only going to repeat its old patterns, which you have done year after year here, right? So the process is a death and rebirth, okay? Nothing short of ego death is going to get you out of this, okay? Then the resurrected consciousness will be able to do wonders in the world, because you'll be in your real self. And that infinite consciousness will make your character into a genius able to fulfill its mission, whatever is the will of God, which you will then be in rapport with, and there won't be any sense of separation. But until you've gone through the death and rebirth, it won't happen. And here's the problem. To go through that death means to accept that everything is the will of God and to stop struggling, okay? The one thing you've never stopped is your struggle. And if you would just relax, then the character that is based on that contraction and that internal strife will subside and disappear, and you'll find that you were free all along. And the only obstacle was your struggle to get free itself.
I would like to hear a little more about awakening the soul to feel more of the truth of bliss, of the real self.
Say it again. Awakening? Is that what the question was?
Awakening the soul
Uh-huh.
to feel more of the truth of bliss, of the real self.
The soul is, as I've said very often, the negation of the ego. It's like an anti-ego. And so in order to awaken the soul, you have to silence the ego narrative. That silence awakens it, because that causes it to come out of its hypnotic trance. Because the ego's mental chatter, even if there are intermittent, let's say, spaces where there is a bit of silence or relative peace, nonetheless, the suturing of that narrative never breaks. But once the fullness of the understanding that you're not the ego has come to you, and that it is a fictional character, and you no longer want to be identified with it because it's limiting you. It's preventing you from connecting to your infinite self and all of the potential creative intelligence that you would be able to then download and be absorbed in, all the awe and the wonder and the joy. So once the soul realizes that it's cheating itself and it's identifying with a fictional character that it has outgrown, that character now is obsolete because you have more wisdom than it knows how to process, and so you have no choice but then to return to yourself, which is to adore that infinite, unmanifest self that you will be able to then resonate with and go through the letting go, the death and rebirth of your consciousness into the soul itself coming back into union with the infinite self. So it happens when the disidentification and the desire to go back into ignorance because of whatever comforts or jouissance it has provided has been overcome by your realization of the far greater treasure of infinite consciousness. Okay, I hope that helps.
I have a question about the guilt that you mentioned in the teaching. Because it's something that I stumble against so often. And very often I sort of try to test or like see, is that guilt accurate, right? By approaching the one whom I feel so guilty about, for example. And then so often it's shown like there was nothing to worry about. And but for hours I've been going on in a kind of loop, attacking myself. And you've said before in a teaching that, if I remember correctly, that the guilt can come from the superego inside, like a guilt towards the parents, and also a guilt for living in bad faith, a deeper guilt towards the self. I remember that. Nonetheless, I find it very difficult to get myself out of those narratives of a negative self-judgment that I feel very much inhibit that liberation that in moments does come through a sense of freedom, but then there's this negative self-judgment that then stops it right there. So,
is it only the negative self-judgment? Because I also think that there's anger there. So there's one fragment that holds the guilt. The other side says, no, you're guilty. Mother, father, whoever, right? You're guilty, and I won't forgive you. So you've got this this double polarity there that each one holds on to the other, and creates a hostile dependency internally between the child ego and the superego. And then that manifests in all the various forms of superego, like the one who says, do as I say, not as I do, right? The hypocritical one and all. So there are all of these different superego, let's say, standards and let's say, hypocritical ways of living inauthentically that in some way are not only tempting, but are commanded to emulate or mimetically take over, right? Because you were not given a truly healthy path to adulthood. And so you had to take these kinds of, let's say, ego, contaminated, toxic ego ideals. Let's put it that way, right? They were something to strive for, but they were also something to be disgusted by. And so there would be also a push-pull, and therefore not wanting to grow up at all, and that, but then feeling even more guilty for that, right? Yeah. So it's a never-ending brew of reasons to feel guilty, and it's like you play chopsticks and go from one to the other. But the whole thing is a fictional, complex narrative, and once you understand the whole thing as a kind of a very childish form of mandala that you created in childhood to deal with the situation. But it no longer suits who you are and your intelligence and your truly adult sanskaras that despite all of this you have gained, and access to soul consciousness. And so now it's just a matter of using your will to attune to the higher aspect of your being and to sublate the lower. In other words, it goes through a death, but all of its capacities become sublimated to a level in which they can produce a worldly wisdom as well as metaphysical understanding. And you have all of that potential, but it has to be metabolized by going through this alchemical process of the sacrifice of the ego.
I really appreciate you saying that. And one other question that comes up, if I may, is because that's another thing that I've been feeling guilty about, is not being able to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I hear, what you're saying now is perhaps I should accept the alchemical process more and see it more like that rather than...
Surrender even to your inability to surrender. Okay? Really, because don't give the ego any excuse to be at odds with itself. Accept it as it is. This is the set of information you were given. Once you are able to make use of it, you will turn it into great wisdom. But right now, all it is weaponized to hold you in an internal prison. And if you want to get out of it, then you have to melt down the iron bars and turn it into your own power to create a vimana and fly out of there.
Gee, I'll keep melting away then.
That's it. But melt it out of love for who you really are. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't know who that is yet. But you know you are infinite and eternal. And let that energy pour in.
Thank you so much once again.
Thank you. Namaste and blessings.
Okay, a question from Uma. Could you please explain more about the guilt of bad faith and what is exactly meant by it so I can understand it correctly?
Well, guilt and bad faith are not quite the same. You can feel guilty for living in bad faith. But bad faith can mean a lot of things to you, but mostly it would be some way in which you feel you have betrayed yourself, okay, and did not live up to the call of a situation or a relationship or whatever was required. You weren't able to make a sacrifice that was needed at a given moment, and the window of opportunity closed, and now there's a judgment, and et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of let's say, poison that some people are carrying that they feel remorse for, but it's never fully released. That's one thing that can be looked for. But most of the guilt that you're probably feeling is not about living in bad faith. It's about making a decision to blame yourself for the situation you were born into, when you were a victim of it and you were not guilty of anything. You were completely innocent. But you took on a sense of, it's my responsibility that, people were so unhappy, et cetera, and the narrative that goes on from that. It's purely fictional. It has no validity. And so whenever you run into a narrative like that, you have to be willing to write that out of the script of your character, because it didn't belong there in the first place. It has no relationship to any reality. And then once you realize that, you'll see that the entire narrative structure is completely fictional and not worth anything except to give you perhaps an illusion of security. But that is at the cost of feeling unable to live a fulfilled life.